In the table below, we're going to assume that A is less than B. And so we want to be able to then identify the summary of types of intervals. We want to determine how do we write this in set builder notation and how do we write it in interval notation. And in the center, they're giving us the verbal description, and we want to also be able to note this as a graph. So in the verbal description, this says that the set of real numbers greater than A. So we're going to go over here and graph first, and then we're going to fill in the set builder and the interval notation. So if we take a look at the graph, it says set of real numbers greater. Okay, so greater than A. So that means that it doesn't say greater than or equal to. Since it just says greater than, we're going to use a parenthesis, and it's going towards the right, and it's going towards positive infinity. So therefore, that's going to be the graph. Okay, how do we write this in interval notation? We're going to put parentheses, put the value of A here, comma, and then positive infinity on the right. Now, how do we write this in set builder notation? Well, over here, we're going to write braces, and we're going to say X such that X, all the values of X, is going to be greater than the value of A. Okay, so that is the set builder notation, the graph, and the interval notation according to the verbal description of that. Okay, the next one says the set of real numbers greater than or equal to A. So again, now this says greater than or equal to A. So that means we're going to use a bracket. A bracket tells us that we're going to include A, and it's pointing to the right because it's greater than A as well. So it's going to go in, again, to the right, and it's going towards positive infinity. So how do we write the interval notation? Well, this time we have a bracket here at the left because that represents where the AA is, and it's going towards positive infinity. And therefore that represents the interval notation. Now the set builder notation would be X such that X is greater than or equal to A. So there's a difference, again, between the first and the second one. The first one, it does not include A. The second one, it does include A because it says or equal to. Okay, the next one says the set of real numbers less than B. So this is less than B. Okay, so we're not including B, and we're going towards the left because it's going to be less than B. So that means we're going to draw a parenthesis, and it's going towards the left, and it's going towards negative infinity. So how do we write this in interval notation? So we write this by choosing everything that has an infinity on that particular side is always going to be represented by a parenthesis because it never ends. And that's why there's a parenthesis there. So we're going to have parenthesis, negative infinity, and then going towards the right here, which is B, and that also has a parenthesis because it does not include the value of B. And so how do we write this in set builder notation? We're going to do the following. We're going to say X such that X is less than B. Okay, the next one says the set of real numbers less than or equal to. So it's less than or equal to B. Okay, so instead of using a parenthesis now, we're going to use a bracket because we're including the value of B, and it's going towards negative infinity. So we're going to write our interval notation to be parenthesis, negative infinity, and then comma B, and we're going to put a bracket there because we're including the B. And how do we write this in set builder notation? Say the following: X such that X is less than or equal to B. Okay, let's take a look at this one down here. It says the set of real numbers between A and B. Okay, so the set of real numbers between A and B would be two parentheses because they're not telling us to include it. And then we got to draw a line underneath in the middle of it to denote that it's all the numbers that are between A and B. So how do we write this in interval notation? We're going to have a parenthesis. We have an A on the left side, comma, B on the right side. And so how do we write this in interval notation? So we have x such that, well, since it's in between a and b, we're going to have the a on the left less than, put the value of x here, less than b. Okay, because that basically shows you that x is in between a and b, meaning that x is greater than a, but it's less than b, meaning it's in between those. Okay, next it says the set of real numbers greater than or equal to a and less than b. So that means that it's going to be greater than or equal to a. So we have a bracket at greater than or equal to a. And it says less than b. So that means it's going to have a parenthesis here because it does not include the b. So therefore, we would have bracket with an a, comma, b with a parenthesis at the end. Now, how do we write this in set builder notation? We would do the following. We would say x such that we have a here on the left, but that means that those numbers of x, okay, this means that x is greater than or equal to a, but then the other value is going to be less than b, and therefore there is your set builder notation. Okay, the next one says the set of real numbers greater than a. So greater than a doesn't say greater than or equal to, so you have a parenthesis and it's going towards the right. And it says less than or equal to b. So that means you have brackets going towards that direction. So we have parenthesis a, comma, b with a bracket. And so how do we write this in set builder notation? We have x such that we have a less than x, which is less than or equal to b. Okay, the set of real numbers between a and b inclusive. Okay, so it's saying the set of real numbers inclusive means you're including both a and b. So that means you're going to have a bracket at a and a bracket at b, and because it's saying in between. So we have a bracket a, comma, b with a bracket. And so with set builder notation, we would write it as the following. X such that x is going to be in between a and b inclusive, meaning that you're including both a and b. Okay, this next verbal description says the set of real numbers that's less than a or greater than b. So if we say less than a, we have a parenthesis that's going towards the left and it's going towards negative infinity. And then it says or greater than b, which means that we have a parenthesis going towards the right, towards positive infinity. So in order for us to write this interval notation, this is different than the first ones we've talked about because we're going to have two different interval notations. So we have parenthesis negative infinity going towards a with a parenthesis, and then or meaning the same thing. So or has a symbol of union, and that's a union. And then we have parenthesis starting at b going towards positive infinity. And so in set builder notation, we would write it as the following. X such that x is less than a, or x is greater than b. Okay, and then the last one says the set of all real numbers. So if we want to have the set of all real numbers, that means we're going to include everything that's on a graph with an arrow going to the left and an arrow going to the right. So we have negative infinity to positive infinity. So the set of all real numbers is going to have parentheses with negative infinity, comma, positive infinity. And then with set builder notation, we would write this as the following. X such that x is a real number.